never set out to win against a coworker. I just wanted to do my job, stay professional, and get through my workdays without feeling small. But there's something quietly powerful about watching someone who once dismissed you slowly realize that you're no longer beneath the demand, that they don't get to control you anymore. This is a story about a workplace power shift that didn't happen through shouting, complaints, or sabotage, but through patience, growth, and letting someone's own behavior catch up with them. When I joined my organization about 3.5 years ago, I was part-time, working in fundraising, and I shared an office with a colleague named Jamie, who worked full-time in administration. We were part of a small team, only 7 people inside a nonprofit of about 50 staff total. At first, everything felt easy and friendly. We joked, talked about our weekends, and had that comfortable, casual coworker relationship you hope for when you start a new job. But over time, as I began to grow more confident in my role and take more initiative even as a part-timer, the dynamic started to change in subtle but unsettling ways. Meetings I should have been included in suddenly happened without me. Important fundraising conversations went on behind my back. Numbers were shared that didn't make sense, and when I tried to calmly clarify or correct them, I was met with resistance, dismissal, and eventually open disrespect. There was no real HR to turn to, and our boss was disengaged. So I learned very quickly that if I wanted to survive in that environment, I'd have to rely on my own composure and professionalism. I didn't realize it then, but that quiet decision to stay steady, observant, and focused on my work would completely change the balance of power in ways I never could have planned. When I first joined the organization 3.5 years ago, everything felt fine. I was hired part-time in fundraising, which already put me in a slightly awkward position because everyone else on our small 7-person team was full-time. Jamie joined not long after me as a full-time administrator, and we ended up sharing an office. At the beginning, there was nothing alarming about our dynamic. We chatted casually, joked during slow moments, talked about weekends, and had what I thought was a friendly coworker relationship. It wasn't deep, but it didn't need to be. In a non-profit environment, especially a small one, you rely on teamwork and basic goodwill to get through the day. I focused on learning my role, understanding donor relationships, and trying to add value even though I wasn't there full-time. Jamie seemed supportive enough back then. If anything, I assumed we were equals who simply had different responsibilities. Looking back, I realized this was the calm before the shift. At the time, I thought professionalism and friendliness were enough to protect you at work. I didn't yet understand how quickly that balance can change when insecurity enters the picture. About a year ago, something changed. I didn't notice it all at once. It was subtle at first. As I became more confident in my fundraising role, I started taking more initiative. I brought ideas to meetings, followed up on donor conversations, and tried to think strategically about long-term growth. Even though I was still part-time, my role was expanding naturally. That's when Jamie's behavior toward me began to cool. I started realizing I wasn't being invited to meetings that directly involved fundraising. I absolutely should have been part of. Information I needed would reach me later, not at all. When I asked questions, I'd get vague answers, deflections, or promises that were never followed through. What made it stranger was that fundraising wasn't her area of expertise at all. Her role was administrative, yet she seemed increasingly invested in controlling information related to my work. At first, I wondered if I was imagining it. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she was just busy. But as the pattern continued, it became clear this wasn't accidental. It felt like my growth was being treated as a problem that needed to be managed or quietly undermined. As time went on, the exclusion became harder to ignore. I would hear about decisions after they were already made. Conversations about fundraising strategy would happen without me, and then I'd be expected to execute plans I had no input on. When I gently reminded Jamie to loop me in, she'd do it once, just enough to say she had, and then go right back to leaving me out. It was exhausting. On top of that, she began putting completely unrealistic numbers into our budget's figures that didn't reflect donor behavior, past data, or reality. When I tried to explain this calmly, offering context and alternatives, she resisted any feedback at all. It wasn't disagreement, it was dismissal. The message was clear. My expertise wasn't welcome unless it supported her version of things. Being part-time made it worse. I didn't have the authority or visibility to push back hard, and I was painfully aware that rocking the boat could cost me my job. I started dreading interactions with her, questioning my own judgment, and wondering how someone with no fundraising background had suddenly positioned herself as the gatekeeper of my work. The breaking point came during a team meeting. Jamie confidently presented fundraising numbers that were wildly inaccurate, overblown to the point of being misleading. My stomach dropped because I knew those figures would create unrealistic expectations for everyone else. I didn't want to embarrass her, and I certainly didn't want conflict. So I corrected the record gently. I said something like, "Just to clarify, we're still in discussions about these numbers, so they may change." That was it. Calm/neutral. Professional. She turned toward me with a look. I'll never forget Puri Ritashanan leaned in to whisper something rude that only I could hear. It wasn't loud enough for others to notice, but it was deliberate. It was meant to shut me down. In that moment, I realized exactly what was happening. This wasn't about teamwork or confusion. It was about control and insecurity. I thought about going to our boss, but he was disengaged and cynical. HR barely existed, and as a part-time employee, I knew I had very little protection. So instead of escalating, I did the only thing that felt safe. I started quietly planning my exit. Once I accepted that the environment wasn't going to improve, I shifted my mindset. I stopped trying to fix the dynamic and focused on protecting myself. I began searching for other jobs, polishing my resume, and imagining a future somewhere healthier. I kept doing my work well, stayed professional in every interaction, and avoided giving Jamie any emotional reaction she could use against me. Inside, though, I felt defeated. It's incredibly draining to know someone is undermining you while you're expected to smile and collaborate. I worried that my contributions would never be fully recognized, and that I'd always be seen as less than because I wasn't full-time. I assumed my only real option was to leave. Then something unexpected happened. A full-time employee on a different team had to take medical leave, and the organization needed temporary coverage. I volunteered to help, thinking it would just be a short-term way to support the team and maybe build my experience. I had no idea that decision would completely change my trajectory and flip the power dynamic I'd been struggling under for so long. Stepping into that temporary role changed everything. I took on new responsibilities, learned quickly, and proved I could handle far more than my original part-time position suggested. After a few months, leadership approached me with an offer. They wanted me to permanently take over the role. Not only that, they allowed me to help rewrite the job description so I could continue fundraising alongside my new responsibilities. I went from part-time to full-time, from being sidelined to being trusted. I was even given my own assistant to help manage the workload, and I had a say in hiring her. It was a major promotion, especially in a non-profit setting. I got my own office too. Meanwhile, Jamie remained in the same role, still sharing space with others. I don't know her salary, but I'm fairly certain I now make more than she does. The contrast was quiet but unmistakable. I didn't celebrate publicly. I didn't rub it in. I simply did my job, confident for the first time that my work and my value were undeniable. After the promotion, Jamie's behavior changed overnight. The dismissiveness disappeared, replaced by strained smiles and forced friendliness. She started greeting me with exaggerated enthusiasm, sharing updates about even the smallest donations as if we should be celebrating together. I stayed calm, cordial, and neutral. No warmth, no hostility, just professionalism. I stopped going out of my way to chat. I signed my emails with best instead of thanks. I spoke when necessary and collaborated when required, but nothing more. Meanwhile, my assistant, who I had helped hire, was doing an incredible job. I took her out to lunch to celebrate her first few months, and as we walked back, she asked if we could make it a monthly thing. Primera, agreed. Jamie overheard the entire conversation. I won't. It felt symbolic. Jamie began ignoring emails where I gave clear directives, unless they were phrased as questions. But I didn't react. I didn't chase her approval. I simply let the new reality speak for itself. Watching Jamie's struggle with this shift has been strangely validating. She knows I have more authority now. She knows she underestimated me. And while I would never sabotage her or seek revenge, I won't pretend to be friends either. Respect at work is earned, not owed. And professionalism doesn't mean rewarding someone who treated you poorly. What unsettles her most, I think, is that I didn't change who I am. I didn't become cruel. I didn't confront her dramatically. I just stopped being accessible to someone who never respected me in the first place. If she feels intimidated or unstable now, that's not because I did anything wrong, it's because the power she once tried to exert no longer works. This experience taught me that sometimes the most effective response isn't fighting back or calling someone out. It's growing quietly until the imbalance corrects itself. And when that happens, you don't need to say a word. They already know. I want to end this by saying that this story isn't about revenge, and it isn't about proving someone else wrong out loud. It's about what happens when you stop shrinking to make other people comfortable and start trusting your own competence. I didn't win by calling Jamie out, reporting her, or playing office politics better than she did. I won by staying professional, doing my work well, and letting time expose the difference between insecurity and capability. When the power shifted, I didn't gloat, and I didn't try to rebuild a fake friendliness either. I simply set boundaries and let my actions speak. If she feels uncomfortable now, it's not because I'm cruel or intimidating, it's because she no longer controls the situation or the narrative. And that loss of control can be very unsettling for someone who relied on it. If there's one takeaway here, it's this. You don't owe warmth to people who've treated you with disrespect, but you do owe yourself growth. Sometimes the most satisfying justice is quiet, slow, and undeniable.